Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you and welcome to the 376th meeting of the BRTB. This meeting is being recorded, and if anyone online experiences any difficulties, please send a message in the chat box. Members, please turn on your cameras during the roll call for attendance as well as for voting. I ask Regina now to start the roll call. Gina?
Okay. Good morning. City of Annapolis, Anne Arundel County,
Present.
Baltimore City, Baltimore County,
Here.
here, Carroll County, I know Chris is here.
Yes, I'm
Hartford.
here. Can you not hear me?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Hartford County,
Good morning, Sam Kale here for Hartford County.
got it. Thank you. Howard County,
Good morning here.
Queen Anne's County,
Good morning. Steve Cahoon here for Queen Anne's County.
morning, Steve. MDOT,
Good morning, everybody. Jeff Anderson here.
okay. RTA of Central Maryland. And Jason is here. Maryland Department of the Environment.
Here.
Maryland Department of Planning.
Good morning. Here.
Maryland Transit Administration.
Present.
Present. And I see Chris joined us from the City of Annapolis. Roll call is complete.
All right, thank you. So our first item is the approval of the minutes from the July BRTB meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? And hearing anything, I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
I'll motion. Baltimore County.
Anne Arundel County will second.
All right. Any corrections? Oh, so that was Baltimore County for the motion and Anne Arundel for the second. Are there any corrections from the members? Hearing none, we will now vote on the approval of the minutes. When your name is read, please indicate a yea or nay.
City of Annapolis,
Approve?
Anne Arundel County,
Okay.
Baltimore City, Baltimore County,
Yay.
Carroll County,
Yay.
Hartford County,
Aye.
Howard County,
Yay.
Queen Anne's County,
Yay.
MDOT,
Yay.
RTA of Central Maryland.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. The minutes are approved. I think we're going to do a little shift in the agenda. Is that correct? I think we're going with the technical committee first.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So we now ask for the report from the technical committee. This was held earlier this month. Ms. Angelica Daniel will present the report.
Thanks, Trey. We had a few presentations at our August 5th technical committee. The major presentation given at the technical committee was on scenario planning, and that will also be given at the BRTB today. It is a significant task funded in the FY 2025 UPWP. BMT staff also presented an overview of intercity bus service, highlighting the different types of providers, travel options within the bus network, and trends in the intercity bus travel. Staff also reviewed the Federal Transit Administration program in Maryland and the use of Section 5311 funds for 2 state-supported routes. There was also a summary of the 2022 Maryland Intercity Bus Study and identified progress made toward the priorities identified in the plan. Finally, a map was displayed of the inner city bus stops in the Baltimore region and identified considerations for the inner city bus service, including adding HOV lanes on I-95 and improvements to lighting and seating at marked stations at park and ride lots where inner city buses stop. A few general updates were also provided. The functional classification update. MDOT SHA staff explained the decennial update process for the functional classification system. FHWA urban boundaries were redefined based on the 2020 census urban areas. With those urban boundaries in place, it is time to address roadway classification changes as determined by local jurisdictions and SHA. The next update was updating bridge and pavement targets. BMC staff briefed the committee on the work getting started to update the Maryland Transportation Asset Management Plan, also known as TAMP. This work is being led by staff from MDOT SHA Asset Management Office. A kickoff meeting for stakeholders was held on July 21st, 2025. The meeting was attended by staff from the state as well from local jurisdictions and BMC. In Maryland, 88% of the NHS pavement and 91% of the NHS bridge deck area are owned by state agencies, with the remainder being owned by local and federal agencies. The TAMP includes all NHS infrastructure regardless of ownership. States are required to show consistency with TAMP each year by tracking annual investments in infrastructure and determining annual performance. That includes bridge and pavement conditions. The 2026 consistency report will be prepared in spring 2026 using updated targets from the 2022 TAMP. The updated TAMP is expected to be finalized by December 2026. The last general update was regarding Maryland Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan in the Baltimore region. BMC staff shared information about the update to the Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan for the Baltimore region. There will be 2 sets of stakeholder outreach sessions in September and October. The last update was a UPWP update. BMC staff presented an overview of the schedule for the 2027 Long Range Transportation Plan, branded as Region Next 2055. This information will also be presented today at the BRTB. Thank you. That concludes my updates.
All right. Thank you, Angie. Let's see. Next, we're going to have public participation. This is where we have the public has the opportunity to come to the board and offer any to speak to the board. So if there's anyone who wishes to address the board at this time, please indicate in the chat box.
Your chair, there was no one who requested to speak prior to the meeting, and I'm checking right now, but I currently don't see anyone requesting to speak in the chat box.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. We now ask for the report on the public involvement activity from Monica.
Good morning.
It's coming, Monica. One sec. Share.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to give the public involvement report for this month. Next slide. Um, just wanted to remind folks that we've launched a new website or link for our engagement hub. Next slide. It's called Your Region, Your Voice. And so if you go to yourregionyourvoice.org, you'll find our the BMC Engagement Hub. That's our hub on public input. So instead of going to publicinput.com, you now go to yourregionyourvoice.org and you'll find all of our engagement opportunities and all of the ones we've had in the past, and you can sign up for mailing lists and all that kind of stuff there. Next slide. So in terms of our hub in July, we had close to 2,000 folks visit the public input pages. We had 10 people participate in that. We had 83 comments, and we had 51 new subscribers. In July, we sent over 7,800 emails, and we had a very impressive 61% email open rate for those emails. Next slide. So August is Ozone Action Month, and we wanted to share some information about that. We partner with Clean Air Partners to share information about how small changes can improve air quality. So we wanted to just let folks know, if people can set their thermostat a few degrees higher, use fans, that sort of things. Make sure to change your air conditioner filter monthly. Those kinds of things are going to help boost airflow. Switching to electric tools, driving electric if you're able to, as well as biking on good air days. All of these things can help reduce air pollution, which is especially really important during August when air pollution can be at some of its highest levels. So you can learn more about that at cleanairpartners.net and take the Clean Air Challenge. We also want to remind folks that it's back to school time. So we want to, we work with folks at State Highway Safety Office and Zero Deaths MD, and we want to make sure that people are keeping kids safe as they go back to school. So just remembering to stay alert near schools, in neighborhoods and by bus stop, watch for kids, walking or biking, especially in the mornings and afternoons. Always stop for school buses, especially with the flashing lights. It is the law. And just make sure, you can't assume that a child sees or hears your car. Make sure you give them the right of way. So those are a few safety tips. You can learn more and find local resources to share information at zerodeathsmd.gov. So we've been continuing our efforts to do outreach at various commission meetings and professional meetings. Here's some of the meetings that we've attended in the last month or so. So we've been out Commission on Aging meetings, MTA Citizens Advisory, Baltimore City Women's Commissions, groups like that. Next slide. Earlier this month, also, it was National Night Out, so some of our staff were able to go out and connect with folks in the Brooklyn Park community. So it was a really good time. And we're planning more outreach for the fall. So if you know of any community events, please let us know. We're definitely going to be out in Howard County for the Bike Around Columbia event that's going to be happening there on September 13th, but we're looking for other opportunities to get out and about and connect in the community. So please let me know. Next slide. Here's another really great event also in Howard County. I wanted to let folks know about. There is a transportation information forum focused on transit in Howard County. So anyone's curious about how to get around Howard County without relying on a personal car can check out this upcoming Lunch and Learn event on Thursday, September 18th. The event's going to be from 12 to 3 p.m. at the Elk Ridge 50 Plus Center. And there's going to be presentations, resource tables. The group's going to be available from Howard County Office of Aging and Independence, the Regional Transportation Agency, Office of Transportation. So definitely a really great forum. Encourage folks to register and save your seat. There's a link for more information at the bottom there. And just want to remind folks, we're still seeking members for our Transportation Corps. This is a virtual panel of volunteers that provide feedback for the BMC staff and board members. We're looking for folks particularly from Annapolis, Anne Arundel, Carroll, Harford, Howard, and Queen Anne's County. So there's a QR code and a link to how folks can join at yourregionyourvoice.org/core app. Encourage folks to check that out and register today. And just to give the heads up about what's next, we anticipate an upcoming comment period this fall on the Patapsco Regional Greenway, Cherry Hill Trail. And we are going to be launching the Region Next long-range transportation planning process. As we mentioned, we're going to give some more information about that later this meeting. You can stay tuned at yourregionyourvoice.org. There's a QR code to check that website out. And there you can join our mailing list to make sure that you stay up to date. And that's all I have for this month. Any questions?
All right. Thank you, Monica.
So since it is early, Trey, could we move next to the presentation on scenario planning?
Yes. Yes, we can. So the consultant team will provide a summary of key findings from the scenario planning UPWP task. Mr. Zach Kaufman will introduce the topic.
Yes. Good morning. So this project is really about exploring potential policy options and external forces that could affect our region over the next few decades in an effort to inform our upcoming long-range transportation plan. So we've been working with a consultant team at ICF and RSG on this project over the last several months. We had some workshops. Hannah will go into more detail. Anyway, Hannah Twiddell is here from ICF, and she'll be leading this presentation and discussion. And we also have John Slason from RSG to answer questions as well.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Morning.
I'm Hannah Twaddell with ICF. And John, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hello, everyone. Jonathan Slason from RSG, sub-consultant on this effort.
Great. All righty. And I'm just getting the presentation up to presentation mode, I hope. Here we go. I think. Are you seeing, you're just seeing the slide in the non-presentation mode, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, let me just try one more time. Okay, I think that works. There we go. I think that's going to look better.
Yes.
Does it now look like it's in presentation mode? Fabulous. I feel so proud when I can overcome technology before the end of my second cup of coffee. So we are going to be sharing with you some of the highlights from the scenario planning work we've been doing with Zach and the team over the last almost full year, using a really interesting tool called Vision Eval that was developed by the Federal Highway Administration and a group of state departments of transportation and MPOs, of which now BRTB is a proud member, over the last probably 15 or 20 years, I want to say. So there we go. Some of these slides, especially for those of you who attended some of our workshops in May or saw earlier presentations, just a little backstory, still similar. Why are we doing this? We want to be able to think about some really different and new ideas for the upcoming long-range transportation plan update and this in-between time before the next update kicks off soon publicly. We wanted to try out some more sort of extreme futures and see if we can glean any insights from what possible transportation investments and other policies might do in terms of impacting desired outcomes. The process started last October, and we did some early surveys back in the fall just to get a little snapshot of some of the public priorities to try to help us fine-tune the types of strategies we wanted to test and the types of outcomes we wanted to focus on. We did an initial array of about 1,000, almost 1,500 scenarios, which was huge. It's quite ambitious. I think you take the cake for being the largest, most complex data set that I think has yet been used for vision eval. Conducted some workshops last May with various groups of stakeholders, including many of y'all. And then we zeroed in on a group of just a couple hundred, about 260 scenarios with more finely pointed inputs based on what was most impactful out of what we looked at initially, and people commented on the workshops. And today we're coming back with some of those findings and how we want to translate those into recommendations for moving ahead into the long-range plan. The performance measures we used for this process all correlate to the long-range plan goals. So things like travel by different modes, cost impacts of different strategies on different types of households, vehicle miles traveled and emissions, safety, job access. And we also had sort of a cross-cutting principle of looking at the impacts on the region as a whole, but also whether there were some differences in impacts on households where there were less opportunity to access to opportunity compared to households where there were more. And those, quote, opportunity areas differentiation came from the recently completed regional fair housing plan analysis that many of you might be aware of from presentations over the last year or two by the staff. So these opportunity areas, lower areas with lower access to, say, educational opportunity, or with less robust sort of strength in terms of the community fabric, or access to economic opportunity, were ranked by percentile, and the areas that you see sort of in yellow concentrated sort of towards the urban core, and then in a few sort of far out suburban areas are the ones that we took all the scenario data and ran it, to look at differences between those households, the other households around the region, and then the region as a whole. We also took a look at some flood inundation and sea level rise future scenarios from a statewide analysis that actually ICF helped to conduct not long ago. And we've sort of overlaid some of that information on. I'm not going to go into much depth about, pun intended, depth about that today. But I think that's one area where once we get to the next phase of this study with you, that you all get to, we'll be wrapping up our work this month. But one of the things from the long range plan process that when you get into looking at the data at a more fine-grained level, particularly looking at the transportation network, roadways, bridges, transit services that might be disrupted in different scenarios, I think it would be worth pulling back up this data set that we had put together and re-examining the scenarios in a more enriching it with sea level rise and flooding data. The initial scenarios, that 1,500 group, we looked at three sets of something we call policy levers, like which I can't remember which historic person, and I don't want to say it wrong, but give me a lever and I shall move the world. Policy levers that we have at our disposal. We can make different kinds of transportation investments. We can set up different kinds of regulations to help direct housing and residential or commercial growth. And we can put together different kinds of fees, like our current gas tax, which was more of a nationwide strategy, but we can also do local and regional strategies, of which Maryland and this region are already working on some. So we can make those kinds of changes as a board and as elected officials. So we took a look at different types of the strategies we could do and to see what kinds of differences they made on the outcomes. And then for that initial set, we also kind of stress tested everything against outside forces and changes. So things like, what if the economy makes a shift and we have a lot more, maybe fewer jobs than we might have had, expected? What if people are using different kinds of transportation technology in the future, like self-driving cars? And of course, what if the natural environment really changes quite a bit, such as in the sea level rise scenarios we were seeing earlier? So out of that process, which I think you heard about or in the early spring this year, and we talked about during the workshops, out of that process, we had just some big picture findings that led us to diving deeper into what we're going to talk about today. We found, for example, that when we located housing, particularly additional, if we assumed we had some additional housing, if we clustered that housing around jobs or around transit networks or around both existing transit networks, we saw a real bump in desired outcomes. And it was worth note that every time we increased biking and walking trips, we also tended to see higher crash rates among those users, which is logical when you think about it. More activity means more exposure to crashes, unless you do some safety countermeasures. As you'll see in today's presentation, that correlation is still there. One of the changes we did not make in the scenario modeling was to add some assumptions about, let's assume we've made those countermeasures and made those facilities safer. I think that's something that you definitely want to take a look at when we're doing the network level analyses in the long range plan. But it helps to bump up the awareness of that issue. Another key finding we saw that any kind of fees, that any kinds of situations where we raised the cost of driving also obviously increase travel costs, but it really boosts a lot of the effectiveness of some of those transit investments and land use policies. So the next step was to narrow down and refine the scenarios to take a look at what if questions once again, but in a more concentrated fashion. And that's what we're talking about today. I'm not going to talk through every detail of this particular slide, but you will have these as well as the final report that'll come in a few weeks with all the details about how these, what we call policy incentive levers, are reorganized just a little bit. We split out, for example, transit investments from all the other transportation investments and created two separate categories of transportation investments. And that enabled us to then look at combinations of just transit with these various different land use combinations. So you could sort of take that middle set of policy inputs and mix and match them, pair them up. So what if we added both transit and households in the same sort of patterns? Does it boost and amplify the impacts? We also revised the fees that we were testing a little bit, as well as sort of subtly revise some of the non-transit transportation investments as well. The distribution of those additional households and transit investments that we were looking at there was more or less the same as in the first round of scenarios. Again, some of you who were at the workshops in May would recognize these maps. that where we made those decisions around allocating 90,000 additional households in our scenarios in different patterns. And that figure of 90,000 came from some of the research that was done for the region and the state on that fair housing plan, and there is some conversation at the state level about, you know, amping up the amount of housing in this region just based on the latent demand. That we were in a situation where we just don't have quite enough supply to meet the demand in many cases. So that's where the logic of that 90,000 number came from. A couple examples of how you actually put together scenarios. You can take each of these little cards that look like a card deck, I guess, if you want to call it that. So the T1 card or TI1 card. What if we just invested in more bike and walk movement? And we combined that with the TR1 card. What if we bumped up transit around existing transit systems plus the land use 1 card? What if we add those 90,000 households around transit? And the fees 1 card? What if we add on to that, bumping up the gas tax by 50% to 80 cents per gallon in the future? And we look at that combination of cards and compare it to what we call level 0, which is the forecasts and the assumptions in the current long-range transportation plan for outcomes that are calculated for all those measures. You can also mix and match cards. So you can take the TI1 card from the first deck and mix and match it with the transit 4 cards and the land use 4 cards, where we're distributing transit and additional housing around the region, and the pattern pretty similar to what's in the long range plan now, and that reflects local land use policies, more of a region-wide distribution. And then again, you know, add one of the fees cards to that. So that's how the scenarios are built. Just to give you a quick lesson on that. It's a lot of fun. We created a little website, interactive website that we'll also share with you, that lets you play with those combinations yourself and see what the outcomes look like. So this process, we went through about 5 steps to narrow down and narrow down and narrow down the way we were looking at these scenarios till we got some results that really were consistently showing up every time. So we started with looking at just these transportation investments one at a time. You know, what happens if we just try adding more bike and walk infrastructure and incentives? What happens if we add transit around jobs, and how just all by itself without any other policy changes? What happens if we do that and we then look at key outputs like job access and cost of travel and daily living, trip making, crashes, vehicle miles traveled, emissions and delay? Those last 3 tend to go together most of the time. If you get more VMT, you're going to get more emissions and usually more delay. And a lot of the times, the other investments and policies will mitigate that or make it worse. So first, we looked at everything separately. Secondly, we started combining those transportation investments. And then thirdly, we began to layer on the land use policies. So what if we also, you know, did combinations of transportation investments with more land development growth and different patterns? Fourthly, what if we zero down into the sort of more impactful combinations of transportation investments with those land use policies? And then finally, what happens when we layer on the fees and incentives? So I'm going to show you a little series of charts and a few bullet points of findings for each of those steps. And then we'll wrap up today with a little bit of food for thought and some discussion questions that, if we hopefully have a little time for you all to give us some feedback on and think about. So that first step, just looking at the different types of transportation investments separately, we found that the transportation demand management, TDM, which is things like carpooling, ride sharing, really promoting those kinds of alternatives to single occupant driving to reduce commuter congestion, combined with specifically TDM policies that promote working from home, As you all remember, we saw quite a spike in work from home during COVID, and it really was a great gift to transportation planners because we could really see what happens if you bump that up considerably, and it does make a difference. And in our scenarios, that kind of change in reduction in commuter traffic really did consistently make a difference again in terms of reducing costs and increasing, say, bike trips and trips during different parts of the day, which helps to reduce things like crashes and BMT emissions. We also saw a fair amount of impact, even more in many cases, by adding transit in that sort of clustered way. And in some cases, just region-wide, but particularly in those focused patterns of putting more transit around existing transit or around jobs or around both. We really saw some increases. And I don't have the breakout of the impacts on those lower opportunity areas on these slides because the charts would get too complicated, but just letting you know that for the most part, the impacts throughout on things like when you see a benefit in terms of increased walk trips, for example, or bike trips or transit trips, typically that would impact those lower opportunity areas by 1 or 2 or even 3 percentage points more than the region as a whole. So oftentimes when you're seeing some of those kinds of transit benefits, and in future slides, cost benefits or VMT reduction, more often than not, those are going to have a higher benefit for those lower opportunity areas. And that kind of detail is something that we will have in the final report for you to take a look at, but you can just keep that in mind at this point. So just summing up there, when we just looked at transportation investments by themselves without any other policies, we saw again that impact of those reducing commute trips with working from home and TDM programs. And we saw those impacts of transit investments. We did see that increasing effective roadway capacity by a combination of some additional roadway lanes or widening and some strategies called Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or TSMO, to make traffic more efficient by using intelligent transportation systems to redirect traffic or change direction of heavy traffic during a really heavy period, that sort of thing, does tend to reduce emissions and delay because traffic's moving more efficiently. But you're also seeing an increase in vehicle miles traveled and crashes, and you're not getting the benefit of transit, bike, and walk. So there's sort of a mixed bag of benefits out of the TSMO and roadway lanes. So the next step, right, is to take those high impact TDM policies and transit policies and dive a little bit deeper into what happens when you combine just those, right? And so across the board, regardless of which pattern of transit investment, we saw very similar benefits. So it helped to just take a look at whether it made a big difference, how you organize those transit investments in terms of clustering them around jobs or existing transit. And it didn't make a huge difference for those outcomes, which pattern you chose, but you did tend to see benefits and across the board that were, giving us some hope that this is a strong concept to move forward. I'm sure you're noticing that big red row there of bicycle and pedestrian crashes. Again, that's reflecting that reality that we embedded in the model, which was that unless we have some mitigation with safety countermeasures, particularly for those vulnerable populations of bicyclists and pedestrians, we do see consistently an increase every time you bump up that activity. So it's a trade-off for increasing the activity, which is a desired outcome, but it keeps in mind we've got to mitigate the impacts of that, the undesired side effects. So having that more transit with TDM reduces our travel costs, makes sense. If you've got some people just not traveling at all on every single day to work, and again, those impacts tend to be higher in those lower opportunity areas. And we see some nice, decreases in vehicle miles traveled and emissions and more efficiency on the system. third step, right? Let's layer on some of those land use policies. So take a look at, instead of the TDM impact, let's take a look at what happens when you bump up the amount of households and mix and match them with those combinations of transit investments. And we were seeing similar patterns, right? So organizing those additional households and or transit investments around jobs or around jobs and transit together, particularly that putting everything around both jobs and transit systems, kind of distributing it evenly around those two types of places, began to really see some of the interesting benefits. Particularly, you'll notice in terms of walk trips, they go up quite a bit, which again makes sense. Every time you increase households, and 90,000 households is a fair amount of additional population, you're going to increase everything. So activity across the board, both car trips and walk trips and bike trips and everything. But you're also going to increase things like access to jobs. You simply get more households located closer to jobs. So just the proximity alone helps to increase job access in a way that moves the needle enough for us to begin to really look at it in more depth. But it also increases costs and crashes and undesired outcomes. If we fine tune that growth around jobs or around jobs in transit, we see some incremental benefits in terms of better job access, particularly by biking and walking, for example. And then if we add transit to that growth, right, we really see a bump up in transit and walk trips particularly. And we start to see some mitigation of just the natural impacts of just growth in general on things like vehicle crashes and VMT. So it does seem like that combination of the household growth and the transit growth together and coordinated begins to have some substantive impacts on some of the undesired side effects that can happen out of growth. So fourth step, looking at these growth plus transit now scenarios and layering back on, what about some of those other transportation investments like TDM and work from home policies, or more bicycle pedestrian activity, or roadway capacity through TSMO or roadway lanes. And again, you're generally seeing across the board, job access really begins to show as something that's improving. And again, job access is pretty much measured by the time it takes to reach jobs, right? So proximity between housing and jobs will help you make that travel time shorter by simply making the trip shorter, but also making travel more efficient and having more options like transit also help to reduce that travel time, right? Even if they're the same distance or even further apart. So it's sort of the combined effect of that helps us to bump up our job access outcomes, right? And you can see, particularly by bike and walk, you see some real improvements when we start to focus that housing and transit investments around targeted areas. And we do see some of the similar also effects where the roadway capacity gives you some, sort of unique benefits there in terms of some of the emissions reductions. But again, it's sort of with the caveat that you're simultaneously seeing an increase in VMT and some of the other outcomes that you're generally dedicated to trying to stay away from, right? So growth with transit pretty much increases everything. And if you combine them carefully, you can mitigate some of those negative outcomes. And then if we layer on those TDM and work from home policies and really start advancing and promoting that, we get a little bit of additional benefit, particularly reducing costs. And again, that tends to have a higher impact on lower opportunity area households. It's interestingly, the TDM one is the only strategy where you get across the board vehicle crashes, VMT, and emissions going down. Whereas with things like roadway capacity, you get a benefit in terms of delay and emissions, perhaps, or just emissions. But you're seeing increases in some of the other outcomes that sort of offset that benefit. So finally, the last step is looking at fees. What happens if we raise the gas tax? What happens if we introduce a vehicle miles traveled fee, which is a kind of a pay-as-you-go charge per mile that some states and regions are currently experimenting with. So what if we added a fee for just region-wide vehicle miles traveled of 2.5 cents or 5 cents per mile? And then finally, what if we combine that higher VMT fee with additional types of fees, like a congestion fee, like many of you have been reading about in New York City, where it's had kind of phenomenal impacts on traffic issues in New York and London more longer ago. So what happens if we add some targeted fees in the urban core areas, and if we bumped up some of the parking rates in those downtown and urban centers? And you can see, not surprisingly, kind of a gradual uptick in both costs, obviously, but also benefits. They tend to go up across the board every time you add another layer or level of cost. You're going to reduce your crash rates. You're going to reduce your emissions in VMT. You're going to bump up your transit and bike activity. And you're going to get more efficient travel out of that shift away from driving that comes naturally when driving gets more expensive, right? So generally, the 5 cent VMT fee was where we saw, and I'll go back just a second, you kind of saw the big jump between the 2.5 cent fee and the 5 cent fee. And then you see another generally percentage point up when you add on the additional fees. But it was interesting to see how much difference it made to just focus on that VMT fee and bump it up. And then you get sort of an enhancement of that with the multiple additional fees. And then finally, the last step, we sort of put it all together and take a look at the highest impact policy decisions across the board. And we do see that these concepts of if we get, are able to successfully develop more housing households around the region, if we can be focusing the locations of those households around job centers, around transit, around both, we are definitely, should be seeing some of the kinds of benefits we're hoping for and mitigate some of the ones we don't want. If we promote reduced commuter congestion by promoting work from home and TDM programs, we enhance that benefit that comes from just focusing the growth in the transit investments more carefully. And then if we add on some fees, we see an additional bump in those benefits. So you can really sort of see the progression of the types of investments that showed up most impactful at each step, and they logically layer together. So you can, again, this is sort of a verbal summary of what I just was saying, that if we're looking at growth near transit and near jobs, you see benefit adding on, particularly that 5 cent VMT fee, and including the TDM and work from home policies makes a difference. If you want to have lower outcomes, positive and negative, assuming some of the long-range transportation plan baseline that has a lower growth rate, you get reduced impacts compared to higher growth, but you also don't get nearly as many of the benefits. So we really do see the impacts of growth, but growth in an organized sort of intentional way. So those are some of the main outcomes we had for our second analysis. And I'm just going to wrap up by giving you a little bit of food for thought and suggesting some recommendations or ideas for advancing into the long-range transportation plan process, where you have an opportunity not only to do more modeling with this tool, but you can also start putting the outputs from this tool into the travel demand model and take a look at a more finer grained level of what these outcomes look like across the actual transportation network and the roadways and transit systems around the region, and more pinpointed locations around the region. These findings from Vision Eval are fairly broad-based across the region as a whole, based on algorithms about how travel behavior broadly is impacted by different kinds of policy strategies. In terms of transportation investments, just food for thought, if we reduce commute trips, interestingly, even though commute trips are not necessarily the highest percentage of all trip types, they do make a big difference, particularly during peak hours. So looking at strategies to particularly promote work from home, but also balancing it with more transit ridership is a good topic to dig into. How about if we do increase effective roadway capacity by making it more efficient or adding lanes, we get this sort of immediate benefit of reducing delay or emissions or both. But particularly with added lanes, research has shown that those tend to fill up fairly quickly over time. Might even reduce some of the benefits even of the more efficient travel if you get enough growth. So if we do go down the path of continuing to expand roadway capacity, how can we pay more attention to what they call sort of induced travel, where you see the roadways filling back up again and eroding those benefits? A couple of other food for thought. Clearly, we saw benefits from coordinating transit investments with growth, household growth, particularly in focused, organized ways. So one of the benefits we were talking about, you get all different types of bike, walk, and transit trip increases, but we get those crash rates going up as well. So thinking ahead, what are some of the countermeasures we could begin to plug into future modeling? What would make a difference? How do we want to think about that? And then the interesting findings around how powerful it was to locate growth and transit investments near jobs. One of the sort of nuances when we looked more deeply into it was that a lot of the areas with high density, we felt like that might be kind of diluting some of the transit ridership impact and some of the other impact, where just traditionally higher income residents don't tend to use transit. They tend to continue to drive. It may be that some of their commute patterns are not necessarily related to the fact that they're near certain job centers. They may be going somewhere else. So again, this is a good one to think about with the travel model and test and experiment with a little bit more. But really looking creatively at how we can make the most of that kind of association between where we locate housing, particularly more affordable housing options, and where we locate jobs and how we kind of optimize those combinations of places. The fees for thought, that VMT, that 5-cent VMT fee was pretty impressive in terms of boosting a lot of the desired outcomes. Even if you didn't add other kinds of fees to enhance that benefit. So maybe a question would, who needs to be involved, as if we are serious about looking at that option and joining some of the places around the country that have been implementing that. I think back at the workshops, your group was one that made the point that before you start a fee officially, you need to have the other travel options in place, for example. And that particularly makes it important to those higher costs hitting lower income or lower opportunity area households harder. You've really got to have the alternatives in place. You probably need to have other strategies, sort of countermeasures, if you will, to offset the negative impact of cost increases on those households. So I'll leave you with some of these discussion questions that kind of just wrap this up into ideas for advancing the long-range plan, and open it up for questions, for comments around some of these really interesting action steps you might want to take out using this data and using these resources moving forward, looking at different policies in the long range plan, specific types of investments or strategies you might want to dig into deeper. Maybe thinking about implications for how you do project prioritization for the long range plan and or the TIP. Both the criteria and the methods, but also just the processes for how we solicit proposals from local members and so forth. And then just generally in terms of modeling what we want to dig into with the long range plan travel model. So I'll stop there and see if folks have thoughts or questions they want to share now. And of course, we welcome those sent in after the meeting as well. And I'm sure during the long range plan, you'll have many more opportunities to dive into this. John, did I miss anything before we open the mics up?
No, Hannah, you did a great job covering the breadth of this, but I think Hannah did say one thing that I think is important to remember, that the changes that you've seen here in terms of percentages, you might say, wow, not as much change given the breadth of service, the scenarios that were evaluated. But this does cover your incomplete MPO planning area. And while we do have the breakdown for the lower opportunity areas and the higher opportunity areas, and that's not shown here so evident, clearly certain policies, certain investment choices affect geography and affect different households differently. And so we're seeing really the more modest changes because we're averaging everything across this region. And that's why I think, Hannah, you used the term, it kind of mutes the impact a little bit. So we have to be collectively looking at these scenarios as really trajectories or trends and saying, is this the right investment mix, the right choices, rather than maybe the perfect solution right now. So we have to be using the tool for really what it's best used for, which is to explore the what if, give us a little bit of confidence and that exploratory way to explore those curious questions that we might have.
Thanks, John. Any thoughts or things people want to bring up at this point, given available time?
I do not see anything in the chat box. Do any members have questions for Hannah or John?
This is Jason from RTA. I have a quick question. Did you guys take a look at the impacts of like land use and parking policies and how it would affect, transit trips?
That's a great question. We looked at parking fee policies, but I think what you're talking about is policies to just reduce the sheer amount of parking that tends to take up a lot of land area and often make it harder to get places by walking, for example, or transit. And I think and John, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't plug that in really specifically as an input to the model all by itself. I think there is some assumption, though, that when you get that higher sort of density, right, of household growth and transit investments around existing transit or around jobs, there is some, kind of underlying assumption built into the algorithm and the model that, you're going to have just a tighter proximity that you get, that those kinds of parking reduction, policies are also intended to boost. So it's somewhat implied, I guess is what I would say, but it's not, very intentionally set into the model. Is that a good way to say it, John?
Well, I think I'll augment it that in the scenarios that were entertained, we have the 4 different land use scenarios, as well as then there was a fee scenario which accounted for some parking costs. The land use scenarios themselves changed the density and changed the location of both housing and jobs, and that affected travel behavior, including transit trips, in isolation. Then we layered on the possibility to say, well, certain zones we have paid parking today. We I'm admittedly forgetting the extent of it, but we have a flexibility in the tool, and we did do one scenario where we increased the cost of daily paid parking for those that are traveling to those locations today. So Jason, we have the flexibility in the future to be a little bit more focused and to say, well, what if we're now suddenly going to start charging for parking in a new location that today we don't have paid parking? And we'd then be able to demonstrate that there is paid parking is one of the most impactful policies. It's kind of like car insurance. It's one of these things that you don't really think about on a daily basis how much it's actually costing you. And paid parking, when you see it leaving your pocket, that out-of-pocket cost, it really does have some demonstrated effects on travel behavior.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting one to dig into deeper, especially when we are starting to look at the travel model and how to sort of fine tune some of the assumptions in the travel model about basically, if you're going to go with that higher density and proximity, particularly proximity of putting mixed development, jobs, households together, there's got to be space for it. And one of the places you get that physical space is by reducing the amount of land that's dedicated to parking. So I think that it can definitely lead to that conversation. And if you want to go further down that path of question, I think it might be really interesting to take a look at, what would that look like if we really made a substantive difference in some places with the amount of land that's dedicated to parking by changing the requirements.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Jeff Anderson at MDOT. I've got a question or a couple questions. One, it sounded like from your presentation that you did not model in any induced demand, just from the way you framed the discussion about it. And the second, so I just want to confirm that. The second suggestion I would have is I'm very sympathetic to the fact that it's hard to make a big difference when you're adding population to and transportation to a large base of existing population and transportation facilities. I'm wondering if you could break out actually just the impact that the changes, the different scenarios have on the added households. Because while you might see VMT changes for the region be at 1% or something, I think that if you just looked at the impact on the 90,000 households, for instance, you might see dramatic changes for what those individual households experience. And that might be a different way to look at it, whether that VMT change might translate into those 90 households
driving
on average, for instance, 12 miles a day instead of 25, which would be a significant impact if you're living in that household. And that gets masked, I think, by the only presenting it in terms of the impact on the entire region.
Yeah, it's a great point. We could sort of, do a similar sort of stratifying like we did with lower opportunity and higher opportunity areas. I think we could probably do that same kind of geographic stratifying to a certain degree with the locations where we're focusing that additional 90,000 household growth to kind of look at them through a microscope. But I do think for both of those questions, both the induced traffic and the sort of zeroing in on what happens in those places where you really intensify household growth and other investments, including assumptions about parking, space for parking, for example. I think, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where the travel model could be a really useful tool. Because I think you can get much more fine-grained in terms of what happens inside each traffic zone, in terms of assumptions about, for example, mode shift, as you make a given traffic zone more amenable to walking, biking, and transit, you can change the vehicle, mode shift in a more fine-grained way than we did region-wide. And more importantly, for the induced traffic, you can run some iterations, I think, of assigning all these assumptions, turning them into trips that actually run on the roadway network, which is not something that the Vision Eval model does intentionally, so that we can do these big scenarios quickly. But when you take the time to code it in and then do the travel assignment onto the roadway network and then run it again and again, it may be able to show us some of those potential outcomes in terms of induced trips. And John, again, I'll defer to you in terms of the travel modeling side of it. How much could we expect to see in terms of that question of when do we start seeing the diminishing return on investment of particularly roadway capacity expansion?
The going to the last question first, I think we were really curious about those additional 90,000 households because we're not moving homes so much. We're simply adding values of new households to specific job or to current zones where transit or jobs are available. Or do we spread it around in the current land use forecast mix? And we would be interested in diving in more to answer that question more thoroughly, but it looks as if right now the patterns of where many of those jobs are, particularly, they're in areas that generate a lot of VMT per capita today. They're actually much higher than average, and much of that is predicated on that those individuals may not be living working in those particular jobs even today, and they're commuting much further for other jobs. And that's where the travel model may have more insight for us, pun, using your travel model called insight, but that it will start to connect how far is said household, where will it work. Now, it's obviously just a model. We don't have a clear insight, clear ability to say the households living in one TAZ are clearly going to work in this TAZ way over there. But there's clear correlation between income, and where income is higher, typically the travel demand is higher. And frankly, those are many of the zones that we're putting these 90,000 households into. So that's where we saw some of those relationships. But you talked about induced travel, and the vision eval model, I think, goes a touch further than the traditional network-based model that Insight is, that you will get that first level response in both models, where if you increase the roadway capacity, if you add a new lane, link in the highway, if you add more lane miles in vision eval, you will compel some users to say, well, suddenly there's more capacity on the system, I'm going to use it. And therefore, in the absence of that additional capacity, I'd be doing my biking or walking or a transit trip. Both models will then equalize, as we know. I'm trying to describe this, I think everybody's on the page, but is that we'll equalize that congestion on the highway. And so when that then levels out to a certain level of congestion, some individuals will say, well, now it's busy enough, I'm going to go bike and walk. Vision eval just does that, I think, a little bit differently than the network-based models. And you start to see, I think vision eval does a little bit more on capturing that induced travel effect. And where you're seeing that as you add new roadway miles, you're going to see then additional roadway demand for travel. And you're also going to see some changes in those other modes. In both models, you're not going to see the secondary effects, which is the land use changes. So as things become more accessible, we might induce more travel, more land use changes, and that's where both models are ignorant of that. So I think just to be clear that we think that the model captures some of the induced travel, but clearly not all of the long-term effects.
Thank you very much, Hannah and John. This was a great presentation, and I'm sure our members will want to chew on this a bit and perhaps send you some more questions. Thank you. Trey, since Administrator Nizer is here, perhaps we could move to the Vision Zero presentation next.
Sure. All right. So at this time, members will get a update on the direction of the Vision Zero implementation efforts. We welcome MVA Administrator Nizer and Dr. Tim Kearns for this discussion. Welcome.
So much. And thank you for the invitation to be here today. We very much appreciate the partnership that we have with BMC and all the work that BMC is doing with the local jurisdictions to roll out local strategic highway safety plans and help us in our Vision Zero goals. I am Governor Moore's highway safety representative, and Dr. Tim Kearns is our Vision Zero coordinator. So we're going to tag team this presentation a little bit and then always available for questions at the end. And so what we're here today to update you on is our Vision Zero meetings. As many of you are already aware, our goal for Vision Zero is actually established in statute in Maryland, which is unique across the jurisdictions as we look across the country, but really demonstrates both the legislature's commitment to reaching that goal as well as the governor's commitment. They took it a step further with Senate Bill 345 that required the Vision Zero coordinator to convene a meeting to talk about these issues, and in particular to review crash reports related to pedestrian fatalities to determine if additional action needs to be taken, whether that's infrastructure, which is specifically called out in the legislation or otherwise. And so these meetings have really taken the place of what we previously had done in convening our Strategic Highway Safety Plan Executive Committee together. I have to say that in Maryland, we're really fortunate in that we've always had support at the highest levels of the state agencies who are engaged in these efforts, from state police, certainly the Department of Transportation, and the other agencies that fall under Department of Transportation, as well as Department of Health and emergency medical services. And so we've always had those executives present. And I think these Vision Zero meetings, which are public and can be joined live as well as viewed on the website, provide a great avenue to further that dialogue. And then we are required to report to the legislature related to the conversation and any findings. So on the next slide, we do have a public meeting schedule that is available to everybody. Like I said, that is a live stream link that you can click on if you want to go back and hear some of the conversation, if there's a particular crash in a local jurisdiction that you want to hear the dialogue about. That certainly is the intention. I think that being as transparent as possible is certainly a goal of this administration. And as a department, MDOT has relaunched our Serious About Safety campaign to reaffirm our commitment to reaching Vision Zero. And this is one important tenet of that. So Tim's going to walk specifically through what we do in terms of the infrastructure reviews, and then I will come back at the end and talk about next steps. Tim?
You can go to the next slide if you don't mind. Thanks, Christy. And these are the dates where Christy mentioned that we schedule the dates ahead of time for the Vision Zero meetings. The dates for 2025, our next meeting will be October 16th, and we're in the process of planning 2026 now. So we'll have those dates up there shortly. And you can see the zero-md.gov website is where you can find all things Vision Zero and the rest of the activities we have going on with the Highway Safety Office. You can go to the next slide, please. So if you haven't seen SHA's Fatality Infrastructure Review webpage, this is just an example. The webpage link is at the bottom if anybody's interested in tracking along. So all fatalities, pedestrian and bicycle fatalities that occur on state roads are required to have a fatality infrastructure review conducted by SHA. And it's those fatality infrastructure reviews then that are reviewed more in depth at the Vision Zero meetings. So this map just gives you an example of the several years that they've collected the crash information since the bill was passed to require the reviews. So you can go to the next slide and it'll zoom in a little bit. So we've just zoomed in some to Baltimore County and the northeastern part of Baltimore City. I highlighted one particular crash just at random because it wasn't Baltimore County, but this is the type of information that you can collect from the website itself. You can go in and you can see where the crash happened. Some information from the crash report will be brought up there. Whether or not there were any infrastructure deficiencies will be mentioned. So SHA sends a team out after the crashes occur to take a look at the site. They do a site visit. They write up a brief report. And then those reports are what we go over at the Vision Zero meeting. So you can go over the next slide. So we'll go so far as to show a Google Map view so you can see what the area is around it. If there's crosswalks, if there are infrastructure lights, if there's maybe a convenience store on one side and a bus stop on the other, just to get an idea of how foot traffic would go, of how bicyclists might approach that intersection, and of how motorists would approach that intersection, you know, when they're coming up on it. And we'll see different examples of this. This crash occurred at an intersection, but there are a number of crashes that we have where we look at the fatalities where there might not be an intersection, there might not be a shoulder along the side of the road. So there's all kinds of different scenarios where these crashes occur. And one of the things we walk through when we look at these case reviews is to see what happened, what were the factors that were associated with the crash. Was there a lack of lighting? We will even talk about some behavior components to the crash, even though that's not specifically required in the review itself, because we want to know what else we can do there. Often there aren't any deficiencies there. The lighting is sufficient. Sometimes it was a behavior of the driver, behavior of the pedestrian. Something happened that the crash occurred, and we want to make sure we collect that kind of information, and whether we can make interventions based on infrastructure changes or whether we can make changes based on behavior, with whether it's enforcement or whether it's education. We want to make sure that we can not only address these locations, but address other locations like these, because we don't want to be chasing fatalities across the state. We want to identify characteristics that occur that are associated with each one of these incidents, so we can look to see where this might present itself at other locations, and we can be more proactive about addressing motor vehicle crashes and reducing the numbers of fatalities and serious injuries that we have. So we'll walk through 10 to 15 of these cases each meeting. In addition to going over, as Chrissy said, we'll still have the strategic highway safety plan components. So we'll have highway safety office updates. We'll have different emphasis area updates throughout the year now that we meet 4 times a year. So the topics can be a little bit varied, but all addressing highway safety. And I think I will turn it back to Chrissy, but she's also going to address bringing locals into the meetings as well. And you can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate the overview. And so as Tim said, I think we've learned a little bit at each of the initial meetings. And what we recognized is to really, again, drive the numbers down to 0, which is our goal. Having the most comprehensive conversation and partners at the table makes the most sense. And it's been very helpful to have BMC sitting there. But one thing that became clear as we think about the communities in which these crashes are happening, there's development that may be occurring. There could be changes to local roads, which are intersecting with these areas. And so we thought that it would make sense going forward to include local jurisdictions in the conversation. So what we're working on for the upcoming meeting is try to group crashes together, so it's worthwhile for the jurisdiction to join. So an example of Baltimore County, maybe we'll pull several of those crashes together and then invite local representatives from both law enforcement as well as the infrastructure side and EMS as it's appropriate to sit in on the conversations. Frankly, there's probably a lot of perspectives that the locals can provide that we might just not have that same vision of, might not have some level of detail that some locals can provide to shed light on if there are additional enhancements that need to be made. As Tim said, as we go through each of these, we provide direction whether we approve and agree with the review that's already been conducted with SHA, or if we want another look to be taken. And in some cases, that's what we have done. So look forward on the local level to invites coming so that we can just continue the conversation in the most productive way possible. I know we all share the same goal, and that's why we want to make sure we've got all the right folks sitting at the table to try to drive this down and to make those changes that we really want to make. And then on the website with the infrastructure reviews, you'll also, going forward, see the change of adding when those reviews were discussed and voted on as required by the law, and a link to that meeting so that if you want to, make that direct connection because one of those crashes occurred in your region, you can go ahead and make that link. So those are some of the enhancements that have come out of just the first several meetings. I think with each one, we're going to continue to evolve and hopefully make this the best process for everyone. And then, as I said earlier, excuse me, we will report back to the legislature at the end of the year and certainly look forward to continuing the dialogue with them in terms of the best way forward. Just always like to continue to make the plug I referenced earlier that BMC has been really helpful in terms of driving the local plans and making sure the strategic highway safety plans are not just at the state level, but really resonate at that local level. I want to thank everybody for their commitment to that and really encourage that to continue to happen, to continue to do the updates, bring everybody together at that local level, just like we're trying to do at the state level. I think is fundamental to making a difference. So with that, we will wrap it up and open it up for any questions that might be out there.
I do not see any questions in the chat box, but if members do have a question for the administrator or Dr. Kearns, they are here.
So this is a Bi Hui from NDP. So based on the current, up to this point, your general analysis of those fatality crashes in different areas at different locations, what is the general cause of it? And what's the major findings of that assessment?
I think pedestrian crashes are incredibly complex in that there's no single or even few reasons for the crashes. You have crashes that occur in more rural communities. We've seen a lot, and we've reviewed a lot of the crashes that are in areas where they're growing in Southern Maryland, and you are starting to see more development and more pedestrians out and about in those communities. And then you have your more typical pedestrian crashes that we tend to think about in a more city center urban environment. And so Tim can speak about it more specifically, but we did a 360 pedestrian analysis a few years back, and I think it found just as many causes of the crashes as it did crashes themselves. And so that's what makes it so hard to generalize in this area.
Yeah, well, like Chrissy said, it would be really helpful if we reviewed the 30 or 45 cases we've looked at now and say, oh, 70% of them are all related to X, Y, or Z. Unfortunately, they're not. There's always a slightly different component, whether it's related to some places the lighting isn't as good as you would expect. But some places, the pedestrian stepped out in front of a motor vehicle. Chrissy mentioned the 360 report that was done a few years ago. One of the kind of general conclusions from that was a lot of these crashes happen because pedestrians appear where drivers don't expect them to be. And so a lot of these don't occur at intersections where there's a crosswalk and there's plenty of lights. The pedestrian might be walking at night. A lot of these do occur at night. So clothing plays a role, visibility plays a role, but it's not always something that's in a location that you would expect there to be. We can't light up all the roadways so everything is perfectly visible. So there's always different aspects of it that come up each review that we have.
And even the consideration of the communities around that area, as you talk about lighting, obviously important for visibility in the roadway, but the community also has a voice in that too, right? And you have lighting pollution and all those considerations, which is again, I think another reason why it's great to have local engagement so that we understand the dynamics there and don't put in, even an infrastructure fix that's not going to be well received by the communities that ultimately have to use that infrastructure.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions?
I just add that if there's any way the Highway Safety Office or the MVA can be helpful, please reach out to us. I know we love partnership. We know in highway safety that we cannot reach this goal alone, and it is all about those connections and providing resources. There's grant funding available through the Highway Safety Office, funded through NHTSA. And so I just encourage everybody to be in touch and let us know how we can be helpful to you all. And again, I just want to thank BMC for being such a great partner, always being at the table with us and really helping us develop our plans and get out the important messages that we're trying to share.
All right. Well, here are no other questions. Thank you, Administrator Nazar and Tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
We will now jump to our long-range transportation plan. It's that time in the cycle for the BRTB to begin development of the next long-range transportation plan. So here to get us started is Mr. Kaufman again. Welcome back.
Hello, yes. Here, let me get that up and get started. Okay. Has everyone seen presentation mode?
No, it's not. I still see the slide deck on the left.
Okay. Oops.
There you go.
All right. Sorry about the delay there. I'm Zach Kaufman. Thanks, Trey, for the introduction. I'm the long-range planner here at BMC, and I wanted to give you all an introduction to the 2027 LRTP. That seems like a long time away, but there's a lot to do between now and then, so we are preparing for launch. We bought a domain name for Region Next as an evergreen term. That will accompany the year of adoption each time. The horizon year for the next LRTP is 2055, so we are planning on Region Next 2055 for the next LRTP, and we're working on getting branding and a logo and all that set up so we can have a website launched as well. So I think most of you are familiar with the long-range transportation plan, but a quick overview, it addresses at least a 20-year horizon beyond the timeframe covered by the Transportation Improvement Program. We update it every 4 years because we're not in attainment with all air quality standards. It's also fiscally constrained, so we can't spend more than the estimated cost of than the revenues anticipated to be available. It's also air quality constrained, meaning that we do conformity analysis to ensure that we are in alignment with all air quality budgets. So the core of the plan is a list of projects that are anticipated to use federal funds. They tend to be expansion and large-scale system preservation projects, along with their estimated costs and the anticipated revenues to support those projects. It also provides a transportation vision through the region through our adopted goals and strategies, and details various trends, socioeconomic, environmental, technological, that may affect the transportation system over the next 20 to 25 years. A draft schedule, we did an exploration of some of those trends through the LRTP scenario planning project. We also looked at what transportation users are experiencing through our needs assessment. Those projects are wrapping up. Our cooperative forecasting group is actively working to develop demographic forecasts through the end of the year with BMC review and development of model inputs from those forecasts. So I'll get into that in a little more detail, but anyway, we're currently developing forecasts through the horizon year of 2055. We plan to have public involvement activities throughout. We'll begin with a public comment period on the revised LRTP goals and strategies. We had a series of white papers last time on individual LRTP topics, trying to kind of break them down because it's a long, dense document. So we may update those. We may have lunch and learns or newsletters, etc. So we're kind of still formulating some of that. We are also going to work with MDOT to update the financial forecast through the year 2055. And then the core really gets started this fall into the spring, updating the project scoring, including a bike ped scoring methodology, and then a call for projects where we have submittal from you all, as well as scoring of the candidate projects, and then using the scores, costs, to develop a preferred alternative of projects. We analyze the potential impacts of that preferred alternative, have a longer public comment period with meetings in every jurisdiction, followed by adoption in 2027. So we begin with the goals and strategies for the long-range plan. The goal areas generally stay the same from plan to plan with some minor adjustments. As a reminder, they relate to things like accessibility, mobility, safety, existing infrastructure, environmental responsibility, system security, prosperity and economic opportunity, cooperation, and promoting informed decision-making. So as I said, these kind of form the transportation vision for the region. Each of those 9 goals has a set of associated strategies to help us to meet those goals. So staff have been working on revising the strategies with a focus on simplifying the language as possible, combining extraneous goals or extraneous strategies rather into a simpler set of more understandable strategies. Using plain language throughout, and then we're also integrating recommendations from the transportation needs assessment and scenario planning projects, which we're just wrapping up now. And also thinking about prior public comments and what we have learned from the last LRTP. So staff have worked on that throughout August. I think they've done a really great job. We'll have them ready to share with the technical committee and you all soon. In October, loosely, this could shift around a bit, but we're planning to launch the LRTP with a public comment period on the goals and strategies, with reviewing, revising, and responding to those comments, maybe in November, December timeframe, and then having a resolution to present in December or January of this year or early next year. Just so I give you an example from the needs assessment and what recommendations kind of look like. These are fairly broad, but I wanted to show some of the things that we're working on. We wanted to ensure that goal areas are clearly differentiated in terms of goal language and associated strategies. Sometimes the concepts, for example, of accessibility and mobility get mixed. So we wanted to kind of separate those and ensure that the strategies associated with accessibility are focused on that, and the strategies associated with mobility are specifically focused on that. We also wanted to move towards strategies that are actionable and measurable. We want to consider benefits and burdens to lower opportunity areas across all goal areas, as well as a distinct aspect of scoring. We may also consider expanding the set of performance measures to reflect the revised strategies and scoring criteria. So currently, there aren't any adopted performance measures related to accessibility. And so that's an area that we could begin tracking job accessibility or accessibility to other destinations in a more coordinated way. We do that type of analysis already, but this would be more about formalizing it and measuring it over time. Financial forecast is another key element. We're looking at hopefully fall of 2025 into this winter, although we do still need to coordinate with MDOT on what is a reasonable schedule, because they provide a forecast of anticipated federal and state revenues through the horizon year of 2055. They do that in 3 categories: system preservation, operations, and expansion. And we allocate for anticipated system preservation and operations needs first. And so expansion revenues is really whatever is left from total revenues after accounting for system preservation and operations. And most of the projects that are submitted to the LRTP are competing for that pot of expansion funding. We also developed a tool for the last LRTP that estimates local revenues available for transportation. So that was a kind of a spreadsheet-based tool that took the various components of local revenues and then forecast that through the LRTP horizon, so we can update those numbers for the next LRTP. So this is just a look at the prior financial forecast for the 2011 plan, 2015 through the current plan, Resilience 2050. And they really show increasing system preservation needs, as well as decreasing expansion funding availability. System preservation funding has increased from about 21% of the 2011 LRTP to 30% in Resilience 2050. Expansion over that same time frame has decreased from about 26% in 2011 to 17% in Resilience 2050. So there's an ever increasing set of system preservation needs, and as a result, a declining availability of funds for new projects and capital expansions. And I don't think that's unfamiliar to you all, but it is a continuing reality. Project scoring is obviously also a key component. Once projects are submitted during the call for projects, we have to score them according to what we say we value in our transportation goals. So we updated the methodology for Resilience 2050, and we anticipate some additional updates. And we're going to be looking at that and sharing that with you and getting your feedback throughout the fall. We would like to incorporate some comments we received from the prior LRTP, as well as the most recent cycle for the budget for 2025 to 2026, the UPWP. Integrate recommendations as feasible from the transportation needs assessment and scenario planning. We are also adding a new scoring methodology that is focused on standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects. We recently launched a UPWP consultant project to explore integrating these projects into the LRTP. They had previously been incorporated through set-aside funding, so they were still in the LRTP, but scoring them and prioritizing them kind of elevates their standing in the LRTP. We anticipate presenting this scoring methodology to the technical committee in January. We have already set up a steering committee. Some of you are on that steering committee. That will kind of guide the project, and we'll also discuss throughout that project, the policy implications of including these projects. What types of projects should we include? What are the criteria? Should they be only of a certain length or crossing jurisdictional lines? What level of investment do we expect for these projects? And how do we prioritize them versus the much larger transit and roadway projects that are often submitted for the LRTP? Anyway, so that's a new and interesting project that we're working on. regardless, we anticipate a BRTB resolution for this in January or February of next year, so early next year. This is just a look at the current scoring framework for the current long-range plan. We have a priority score, or rather a policy score that's really in your hands. You can decide what are your high priority, medium priority, and low priority projects with different sets of points associated with them. If projects are already supported financially, they get an additional 10-point bump. For a total of 40 policy score points. And then BMC staff score projects on the technical scoring criteria, which are drawn from the regional goals. We score on safety, accessibility, mobility, environment, security, and economic prosperity with different sets of points associated with each goal. Transit projects are eligible for slightly more points. That was a response in the last LRTP cycle to public comment that asked us to prioritize transit versus roadway projects. So this all leads up to project submittal which is anticipated next spring after the TIP submittal happens in March. So we're looking at April through June of next year. We'll provide a project submittal form and instructions ahead of time for you all to submit your projects. And then that will be followed immediately by scoring those projects and development of a preferred alternative. That requires cost estimates for all projects. So last time we worked in collaboration with MDOT, MTA, and SHA to develop a consistent methodology for cost estimates. And then once we have cost estimates, projects, and scores, we can develop that preferred alternative in coordination with you all. I mentioned socioeconomic forecasting. The Cooperative Forecasting Group is currently developing a forecast of households, population, and employment through 2055. They anticipate submitting their draft forecasts in November of this year, or maybe December. BMC then goes through a process of review and develops model inputs. These are the forecast of households, population, and employment through 2055 are key inputs for our travel demand model. It gives us a picture of what the region may look like in the future, and then we conduct analysis of project impacts based on the transportation projects submitted, as well as the number of households, population, and employment, and the distribution of that. They're key, as I said, towards analysis of projects. That includes project scoring, air quality analyses, as well as analysis of the potential effects of projects. In regards to analysis of the impacts of projects, we conduct analysis of accessibility and mobility impacts via transit and driving for different geographies. The needs assessment and scenario planning projects used a definition of lower opportunity areas to look at impacts regionally versus these specific areas. And we're considering adopting that as a consistent methodology for LRTP analysis since we used it on the scenario planning and needs assessment projects. As a reminder, lower opportunity areas are determined by the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership Opportunity Map. That tool utilizes 21 indicators, including employment, poverty level, school performance, to determine opportunity. And so areas in the two bottom quintiles or areas rated as low or very low on this metric were classified as LOAs. And that correlates to the geography in the pictured in the map at the right. So this isn't yet a recommendation. We're still considering this, but we will come back to the tech committee with our recommendation. An alternative could be to look at areas with higher shares of low income population. We currently use a definition of 200% of the poverty level for low income, and that area is shown on the right. You can see that the areas identified as lower opportunity areas on the left are fairly similar to that map of low income households. But of course, there are some TAZ level differences. So anyway, just wanted to get that in front of you as a consideration. And that is all I have for you. So kind of a rapid fire summary of the LRTP schedule, and we'll be diving into each of these steps in more detail as we continue to move the planning process forward for that.
All right, thank you. Any questions, anyone? Okay, here we go. Okay, thank you, Zach. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Now, Virginia, we're going on. Is there any other business to come before the BRTB?
We don't have any business, but we are looking forward to seeing everybody in Providence, Rhode Island for the AMPO annual conference the week starting September 15th.
All right. Hope to see everyone there.